Here's what I'm working on. So I have that data platforms that gathers social conversations around climate change events. So essentially, what's happening is I have Dagster that mines those conversations, and it does a bunch of transformations on top of it. But one thing that I'm missing is that I have those conversations, but I don't necessarily know exactly what they're about unless I do some reading of the whole conversation and digging of what is being discussed. So essentially, what I want to do is have an agent that will act as an investigative reporter and just do some fact finding about what is being discussed and provide a summary at the end. So that is the design of the agent itself. So what it does is that once it gets started, it receives a conversation as a parameter, and then it does an initial assessment of if it has enough information to write a story about it. If it doesn't, then it starts doing a process of research finding. So essentially, it will have a notepad manager where it will keep its research task and the findings that it gathered, and it would loop through all of that. It will use its investigative tools at its disposal to do the research, and then eventually, once it assesses that it has enough information, then it will write the story. So here's an example. Let's go over this thing. So I'm just gathering a conversation from the data platform. So that one is in reaction to a New York Times article around the state of bridges in the United States and how climate change has a corrosive effect on bridge infrastructures. So anyways, that's the conversation around that. And here is the agent state. So that is kind of like my notepad. So what I'm doing is that, so I have the initial conversation, I have an assessment of if my research is complete, the number of cycles that I'm going through, because I want to limit that. The findings that it got, and the brief that it writes at the end. So for the findings, essentially what it does is that it will create a list of tasks, and for each task it will perform searches or whatever is at its disposal with the tools, and once it has enough findings, then it will tag the task as completed, and it will generate a summary of its findings for that specific task. So the LLMs that I have that first one that does an assessment of whether I have enough findings to do a good summary of the conversation. I won't go into those details, but that's essentially it. And then I have another LLM that does a summary of the findings for research task. And then finally, I have a third LLM, which generates the final brief for the conversation. Those are the investigative tools at the disposal of the agent for the moment. So I have DuckDuckGo and I have Wikipedia. And honestly, like at the moment, I'm only using DuckDuckGo. At some point, I want to introduce another node in the agent where it will decide which tool to be using. But that's for a future iteration. So the nodes that I have that assessment node, the research node, and the brief writing node. And then the edges, I have this one where it will decide if it has enough findings to write the brief, or if it should continue doing research. And here a conditional edge to where it will look if it has hit the research limit. So this is the agent being put together. This is what it looks like. And at the end, when I invoke that, it will give me this output. So I have all my findings, and I have my brief at the end. And that's it.